The sky darkened ominously above Lillian Stewart's small cabin as she rocked her 6-month-old daughter to sleep, unaware that the nearby river had silently crept beyond its banks during 3 relentless days of spring rain. It was 1879 in Unionville, Nevada, a silver mining settlement nestled in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains, where Lillian had carved out a humble life for herself and her infant after her husband's death the previous winter. Rain pounded against the wooden roof with increasing fury as Lillian tucked her daughter Emma into her handmade pine cradle. The young mother, just 22 years old, pushed a strand of her auburn hair away from her face and glanced worriedly at the door where water had begun seeping underneath. The cabin sat a quarter-mile from town, on land her husband had claimed before succumbing to pneumonia, leaving Lillian alone to navigate motherhood and survival in the harsh Western Territory. A sudden crack split the night air as the foundation of the cabin shifted. Lillian gasped, rushing to her baby's side just as water began pouring in through the walls. The cabin groaned, timbers splintering as the flood attacked with growing ferocity. Emma awoke, crying fearfully as Lillian clutched her to her chest. "Lord help us," she whispered, water swirling rapidly around her ankles, then her calves. The furniture began to float, and Lillian's heart pounded with terror as she realized they might not survive if she didn't act quickly. The door burst open with a mighty crash, and silhouetted against the storm stood a tall figure, a man on horseback, his duster whipping around him in the wind. "Anyone in there?" a deep voice called out. "Here," Lillian screamed over the roar of rushing water and cracking wood. "Please help us." The man dismounted and waded through the thigh-deep water, his tall frame moving with surprising agility. As he approached, Lillian saw a handsome face beneath the wide brim of his hat, stern with concentration but kind around the eyes. "Madam, this whole valley's flooding. We've got minutes before this cabin gets swept away completely." He surveyed the rapidly deteriorating structure. "Grab the baby in my hand, don't look back." Lillian hesitated only a moment, looking at the home she had shared with her husband, the memories within its walls. The stranger's strong hand extended toward her, and she could see the urgency in his eyes. "I'm Fletcher O'Malley, madam. I ride for the Silver Star Ranch. I promise I'll get you both to safety, but we have to move now." Another terrifying crack from the foundation spurred Lillian into action. She wrapped Emma tightly in a blanket and took Fletcher's hand. He led them through the rising water to his horse, a powerful chestnut stallion that stood steady despite the chaos. "Up you go," he said, helping her mount before handing Emma back to her. He swung up behind Lillian with impressive ease, one arm securing around her waist. "Hold on tight to the little one." Fletcher urged his horse forward through the rushing water. Lillian couldn't help but look back once as they rode away. The sight was devastating, her cabin tilting, then collapsing in on itself as the flood waters claimed it. Everything she owned, everything that remained of her husband's life, disappeared into the muddy torrent. "I said don't look back," Fletcher reminded her gently, his breath warm against her ear as they rode. "Focus on what's ahead." Lillian turned forward, clutching her baby close as they ascended toward higher ground. The rain continued its assault, but Fletcher's sturdy presence behind her gave her a security she hadn't felt in months. His arm around her waist was respectful but firm, keeping her and Emma secure on the saddle as they navigated the treacherous landscape. They reached a ridge overlooking the valley as dawn broke through the clouds. The scene below was one of devastation. The river had reclaimed much of the lowland, and several other cabins besides Lillian's had been destroyed. In the distance, Unionville stood mostly intact, its position on higher ground having saved it from the worst. "We'll head to my ranch," Fletcher said. "It's safe there, up on the plateau. You and your little one can stay until things settle." Lillian nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Emma had fallen back asleep despite their harrowing escape, her tiny face peaceful against her mother's chest. Exhaustion and shock threatened to overtake Lillian as well, but she forced herself to stay alert. "I've lost everything," she finally whispered as they rode through stands of pine trees, the ground beneath them now mercifully dry. No, madam, Fletcher corrected, his voice steady and reassuring. You've got your daughter and your life, the rest can be rebuilt. The Silver Star Ranch appeared before them as they crested a hill, a sturdy main house, a large barn, and several outbuildings spread across a grassy plateau. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, seemingly undisturbed by the storms that had ravaged the valley below. Fletcher helped Lillian dismount and led her to the house, a well-built structure with a wide porch. A gray-haired woman appeared at the door, her weathered face creasing with concern when she saw them. Martha, this lady and her baby need help. Their cabin was taken by the flood, Fletcher explained, removing his hat as they stepped onto the porch. Oh, you poor dear, Martha said, ushering Lillian inside. I'm Martha Winters, the housekeeper. Come in, we need to get you both dry and warm. Lillian followed in a daze, clutching Emma to her chest. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, a far cry from her small cabin. A fire blazed in the stone hearth, and the smell of coffee and fresh bread filled the air. I'm Lillian Stewart, she managed to say. And this is Emma. I don't know how to thank you both. No need for that, Fletcher said, hanging his dripping hat on a peg by the door. Martha will get you settled. I need to head back down and see if anyone else needs help. You'll do no such thing until you've had some hot coffee and breakfast, Martha insisted. The storms let up and those minutes won't make a difference. Besides, Sheriff Dawson and the others will be checking the outlying properties. Fletcher reluctantly agreed, and soon Lillian found herself seated at a solid oak table, Emma sleeping in a makeshift bed Martha had created from a drawer lined with blankets. Lillian's wet clothes had been replaced with a dress belonging to Martha, slightly too large but blessedly dry. Fletcher had changed as well and sat across from her, his presence both comforting and slightly unnerving. How did you know to come to my cabin? Lillian asked as Martha placed steaming plates of eggs and biscuits before them. Fletcher took a sip of coffee before answering. I was riding fence on the eastern boundary when I noticed the creek rising fast. Started checking the low-lying cabins. Yours was the third I visited. His face darkened. The Petersons and old man Jenkins were already gone, made it to town before their places flooded. I had no idea it was so bad, Lillian admitted. I was focused on Emma. She's been fussy with teething, and I didn't realize how much the rain had. Her voice caught as the reality of her situation crashed over her again. You have a place here as long as you need it, Fletcher assured her. The ranch has plenty of room, Martha nodded in agreement. The east bedroom has a nice big bed for you and a perfect corner for the little one. Lillian felt overwhelmed by their kindness. I can work, she offered quickly. I'm good with a needle and I can cook and clean. I won't be a burden. Fletcher's expression softened. No one said anything about you being a burden, Mrs. Stewart, but if you want to help Martha, I'm sure she wouldn't mind the company. Indeed I wouldn't, Martha confirmed with a warm smile. It gets lonely up here with just Mr. O'Malley, and the ranch hands for conversation. After breakfast, despite Martha's protests, Fletcher rode back toward town to check on other residents and bring news of Lillian's safety to anyone who might be concerned. Lillian watched from the porch as he rode away, an unexpected pang of worry in her chest for this man she'd just met. Martha showed Lillian to her room, a comfortable space with a quilt-covered bed and a rocking chair by the window. Sunlight streamed in, making the room feel warm and inviting despite the circumstances. Mr. O'Malley built this house himself, Martha told her as she helped Lillian settle in. Started with just the main room and kitchen 5 years ago when he bought the ranch, then added on as he could afford it. He lives here alone, Lillian asked, surprised at the size of the house for a single man. He had hopes of a family, Martha said, her voice softening. Had a sweetheart back east who was supposed to join him, but she changed her mind at the last minute. Couldn't face life out here, I suppose. Martha adjusted a pillow unnecessarily. He's a good man, Mrs. Stewart, one of the best I've known in my 62 years. Please call me Lillian, she replied, gently rocking Emma, who had awakened and was contentedly nursing at her breast. And I can see that he's kind. I owe him everything. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Fletcher would rise before dawn to work with his ranch hands, while Lillian helped Martha with the cooking and household chores. Emma delighted both Martha and the ranch hands who stopped by the house for meals, her chubby-cheeked smiles earning her many admirers. A week after the flood, Fletcher drove Lillian into town in his wagon to assess the damage and inquire about assistance. Unionville was slowly recovering, though the lower valley remained a muddy mess. The general store owner, Mr. Hopkins, confirmed what Lillian had feared: her cabin was completely destroyed, with nothing salvageable. "I'm mighty sorry, Mrs. Stewart," the shopkeeper said, genuine sympathy in his eyes. "Your husband was a good man. He'd be grateful you and the little one made it out alive." Lillian nodded, fighting back tears. "Yes, he would." As they left the store, Fletcher placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The land is still yours. When you're ready, we can talk about rebuilding." "With what money?" Lillian asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Thomas left me enough to get by, but not enough to build a new house." Fletcher was quiet for a moment as they walked toward the wagon. "There are options. The town might help, I might help, but that's for another day. Right now, you have a home at Silver Star for as long as you need it." His kindness nearly undid her. In that moment, standing on the muddy street of Unionville, Lillian realized how much she had come to depend on Fletcher O'Malley in the short time she'd known him. It was a frightening feeling for a woman who had prided herself on her independence. Back at the ranch, life continued. May turned to June, and the valley dried out under the summer sun. Lillian found herself settling into life at Silver Star, learning the rhythms of ranch living. Emma grew stronger each day, now attempting to crawl and babbling happily. Fletcher remained a respectful presence, kind but maintaining a careful distance that Lillian both appreciated and, increasingly, found herself wishing he wouldn't keep. In the evenings, after Emma was asleep, they often sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple. "Tell me about your husband," Fletcher said one such evening, surprising her with the direct question. Lillian took a breath, her hands folding in her lap. "Thomas was a dreamer, came west to find silver like so many others. He was kind, hardworking, not always practical." She smiled sadly. "He built our cabin on that beautiful spot by the creek because I mentioned once how I loved the sound of running water, never considered it might flood." Fletcher nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And you, did you share his dreams of striking it rich?" "I shared his dream of building something that was ours," she corrected. "The silver was his obsession, not mine. I just wanted a home, a family." She glanced through the window where Emma slept peacefully. "I got half of that wish, at least." "He'd be proud of how you've handled everything," Fletcher said softly. Lillian looked at him directly, taking in his strong profile against the darkening sky. "What about you, Mr. O'Malley?" "Martha mentioned you had plans for a family once." A shadow crossed his face. "Martha talks too much sometimes. She cares about you," Lillian replied. "As do I. You saved our lives after all." Fletcher was quiet for so long that Lillian thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Her name was Catherine. We grew up together in Boston. I came west first to establish myself, sent for her a year later." His jaw tightened. "Got a letter instead of a bride. She'd married a banker, safer prospect than a rancher in Nevada territory." "I'm sorry," Lillian said simply. Fletcher shrugged, but Lillian could see the old pain in his eyes. "Turned out for the best. She wouldn't have been happy here, and I've built something good, something that will last." They sat in companionable silence as the stars emerged above them, countless pinpricks of light in the vast Nevada sky. Lillian felt a connection with this quiet, steady man that she couldn't quite explain, a trust that went beyond gratitude for her rescue. July brought scorching heat to the valley. Lillian found herself spending more time outdoors in the early mornings and evenings, avoiding the worst of the day's temperature. Emma was now fully mobile, crawling with determination and pulling herself up on furniture. Fletcher built her a small corral of sorts on the porch where she could play safely while Lillian worked. One morning, Fletcher found Lillian at the clothesline, hanging laundry in the fresh air. "I've been thinking about your cabin situation," he said without preamble. Lillian paused, a wet shirt in her hands. "Oh, Winter will be here before we know it. If you want to rebuild, we should start planning now." A complicated mix of emotions washed over Lillian. The practical side of her knew he was right, she couldn't impose on his hospitality forever. Yet the thought of leaving Silver Star created an unexpected ache in her chest. "I've been saving what I can," she said, resuming her task to hide her discomfort. "But it won't be enough for a proper house before winter." Fletcher leaned against the porch post, his hat pulled low against the morning sun. "I have a proposition for you. My foreman, Charlie, is getting married next month. He and his bride will need his cabin, which means I need a new cook for the ranch hands." Lillian hung the last piece of laundry and turned to face him. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. O'Malley?" "I'm offering you a solution," he clarified. "Room and board for you and Emma plus wages. By spring, you'd have enough saved to rebuild if you still want to." "And if I don't want to cook for a bunch of hungry cowboys?" she asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Then I'll just have to come up with another proposition, Mrs. Stewart. I'm determined to keep you and Emma safe one way or another." The directness of his statement sent a rush of warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. In that moment, Lillian recognized the feelings she'd been trying to ignore. She was falling in love with Fletcher O'Malley. "I accept your proposition," she said, attempting to keep her voice steady. "On one condition." Fletcher raised an eyebrow. "And what might that be?" "That you start calling me Lillian instead of Mrs. Stewart. It seems silly to be so formal when I'll be cooking your meals." His smile widened, transforming his face. "Only if you'll call me Fletcher instead of Mr. O'Malley." "It's a deal, Fletcher," she said, feeling like she'd crossed some invisible boundary between them. The following weeks brought changes to Silver Star Ranch. Lillian took over cooking duties from Martha, who was happy to focus on the household management. The ranch hands 5 weathered men of varying ages were initially reserved around Lillian, but Emma's cheerful presence and Lillian's cooking quickly won them over. Fletcher was often away during the days, riding the property or handling business in town, but evenings became a cherished time. After Emma was asleep, he and Lillian would often sit in the main room, Fletcher reading from one of his many books while Lillian mended or worked on sewing projects. Sometimes they talked, sharing pieces of their past or discussing the day's events. Other times they simply enjoyed the comfortable silence between them. It was during one of these quiet evenings in late August that their relationship shifted again. Lillian was embroidering a small dress for Emma when she pricked her finger. A drop of blood welled up and she let out a small gasp of pain. Fletcher was at her side immediately, taking her hand in his. "Let me see," he said, examining the tiny wound with far more concern than it warranted. "It's nothing," Lillian assured him, but made no move to withdraw her hand from his gentle grip. Fletcher looked from her finger to her face, his expression suddenly intense. "Lillian," he said, her name sounding different somehow in his deep voice. "I find myself in a difficult position." Her heart began to beat faster. "What position is that?" "I offered you employment to help you get back on your feet. It wouldn't be right for me to." He paused, struggling with his words. "I don't want you to feel obligated in any way." Understanding dawned on Lillian. "You're worried that I might think my job depends on reciprocating your feelings?" Fletcher nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I would never want you to think that." Lillian took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "What if my feelings have nothing to do with gratitude or obligation? What if they're simply about the man you are?" The hope that sparked in his eyes gave her the confidence to continue. "You saved us that night, yes, but it's who you've been every day since then that matters to me now." She turned her hand in his so their palms met. "I care for you, Fletcher. Not because I owe you, but because I know you." Fletcher's free hand moved to gently cup her cheek. "I've been fighting how I feel since that first week you were here, telling myself it was too soon after your loss, that you needed time." "Thomas has been gone nearly a year," Lillian said softly. "I mourned him properly, but life goes on, especially out here. He would want Emma and me to be happy." "And do I make you happy, Lillian Stewart?" Fletcher asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," she answered simply. "You do." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Lillian closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with shared longing. When they finally broke apart, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I should have a talk with Reverend Davis next time I'm in town," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Lillian laughed softly. "Are you proposing Fletcher O'Malley?" "Not properly," he admitted with a smile. "When I do, you'll know it. I just want to make my intentions clear. I want to court you properly with marriage in mind, if you're amenable." "I'm very amenable," Lillian replied, her heart lighter than it had been in months. They agreed to take things slowly, for Emma's sake as well as their own. Fletcher began courting Lillian with a charming formality that both amused and touched her, bringing wildflowers when he returned from his rides, carving small wooden toys for Emma, and finding reasons to help Lillian with her chores just to be near her. The ranch hands noticed the change in their boss, exchanging knowing glances when Fletcher lingered at the house longer than necessary. Martha was openly delighted, telling Lillian one afternoon, "I haven't seen that boy smile so much since he first bought this place. You're good for him." September brought cooler weather and the cattle roundup. Fletcher was often gone from dawn until well after dark, working with his men to gather the herd for market. Lillian kept busy with the increased cooking demands, preparing hearty meals for the exhausted cowboys and packing lunches for them to take on the range. When Fletcher finally returned from delivering the cattle to the railroad in Elko, he came bearing gifts: a beautiful blue dress for Lillian, a hand-carved rocking horse for Emma, and a small velvet box that he kept in his pocket, waiting for the right moment. That moment came on a crisp October evening. Fletcher had asked Lillian to join him for a ride to his favorite spot on the ranch, with Martha happily volunteering to watch Emma. He helped Lillian onto his horse and mounted behind her, his arms around her waist as they rode through golden aspen groves toward a high meadow overlooking the valley. As the sun began to set, painting the landscape in amber and rose, Fletcher helped Lillian down and led her to a large boulder where they could sit and watch the spectacle. The valley stretched below them, Unionville visible in the distance, and beyond it, the spot where Lillian's cabin had once stood. "It's beautiful up here," Lillian said, leaning comfortably against Fletcher's shoulder. "I used to come here to think before you arrived," he admitted. "When I was lonely or troubled, I'd look out at all this and remind myself why I stayed, even after Catherine chose not to join me." Lillian squeezed his hand. "I'm glad you stayed." Fletcher turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Lillian, these past months have shown me what I was waiting for all along. Not just any woman to share my life, but the right woman. Someone strong enough for this land, kind enough to open her heart after loss, and brave enough to start again." He reached into his pocket and withdrew the small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a gold ring with a delicate diamond that caught the fading sunlight. "I love you, Lillian Stewart. I love Emma too, as if she were my own. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife, of allowing me to be a father to your daughter, of building a life together here at Silver Star?" Tears filled Lillian's eyes as she looked from the ring to Fletcher's hopeful face. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Fletcher. I would be proud to be your wife." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace that spoke of all the love and promise between them. Their kiss was sealed with the last rays of sunlight as darkness settled over the Nevada landscape. The wedding took place in Unionville's small church 2 weeks later. The entire town turned out for the occasion, along with all the Silver Star hands and neighboring ranchers. Lillian wore the blue dress Fletcher had bought her, with wildflowers in her hair. Emma, now nearly a year old, was passed among adoring ranch hands during the ceremony, though she reached for Fletcher when he and Lillian exchanged vows. Reverend Davis pronounced them husband and wife just as the first snowflakes of winter began to fall outside the church windows, a good omen, the old-timers said, promising fertility and prosperity. The celebration continued at the Silver Star, with music and dancing lasting well into the night. When the last guests had departed or bedded down in the bunkhouse, Fletcher carried his bride across the threshold of the house that was now truly her home. "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Malley," he whispered, setting her gently on her feet in their bedroom. Lillian's heart swelled with emotion as she looked at this man who had saved her from the flood, and then, slowly and surely, saved her from the loneliness that had threatened to overwhelm her after Thomas's death. "I love you," she said simply, reaching up to touch his face. Their first night as husband and wife was tender and passionate, a beginning that promised a lifetime of shared joys and sorrows, of building something lasting together on the foundation of trust they had established. Winter settled over Silver Star Ranch, snow blanketing the pastures and mountains. Inside the ranch house, Lillian, Fletcher, and Emma created new traditions and memories. Christmas was celebrated with a tree Fletcher cut from the foothills, decorated with paper ornaments Lillian crafted and strung with popcorn and berries. Emma delighted in the colorful decorations, though she was more interested in the wrapping paper than the wooden doll Fletcher had carved for her. On Christmas morning, Fletcher presented Lillian with a deed. The land where her cabin had stood was now officially transferred into both their names. "In the spring, we'll build a small cabin there," he explained. "Nothing fancy, just a place where we can go when we want time away from the ranch." A place for Emma to learn about her father's dreams. Tears of gratitude filled Lillian's eyes. "You're a good man, Fletcher O'Malley," he kissed her softly. "I'm just a man who loves his family." By February, Lillian had news of her own to share. After tucking Emma into bed one night, she joined Fletcher by the fire, a nervous excitement making her hands tremble slightly. "Are you cold?" Fletcher asked, making room for her beside him on the sofa. "No," Lillian replied, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "But someone new might be joining us come fall." Fletcher's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Are you certain?" Lillian nodded, her smile radiant. "Martha suspected before I did. All the signs are there." With a whoop of joy that startled the ranch dog sleeping by the fire, Fletcher lifted Lillian into his arms and spun her around. "A baby, our baby!" His joy was infectious, and soon they were both laughing, making plans and dreaming of the future. Later, as they lay in bed, Fletcher's hand protectively covering her stomach, Lillian reflected on how completely her life had transformed in less than a year. "What are you thinking?" Fletcher asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about that night," she answered honestly. "The flood, how terrified I was when I heard the cabin breaking apart, how certain I was that Emma and I wouldn't survive." Fletcher pulled her closer. "I still thank God I found you in time." "So do I," Lillian murmured, "but I'm also thinking about what you said when you reached us." "Grab the baby in my hand, don't look back, you were right, you know, looking forward saved us, not just that night but every day since." "We'll always look forward together," Fletcher promised, placing a gentle kiss on her forehead, "but we'll remember where we've been too." It's all part of our story. Spring came early to Nevada that year. March brought warm winds and green shoots pushing through the soil. As promised, Fletcher began work on a small cabin near the site of Lillian's former home. The location was the same, but he chose higher ground, away from the creek that had proven so treacherous. Lillian, now visibly pregnant, often rode with him to supervise the construction, bringing Emma, who was walking confidently and chattering in a language only she fully understood. Several of the ranch hands helped with the building when their regular duties allowed, and by late April, a sturdy two-room cabin stood complete. "It's perfect," Lillian declared when they spent their first night there in early May. The cabin was simple but well-built, with a stone fireplace, solid wooden furniture Fletcher had crafted himself, and curtains Lillian had sewn from cheerful yellow fabric. "It's not as grand as the ranch house," Fletcher said, watching her carefully for any sign of disappointment. "It's exactly what I wanted," she assured him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "A piece of the past preserved but made better and safer, like everything you touch." They used the cabin as a retreat throughout the summer, sometimes staying for a few days at a time while Martha and the foreman's wife, Clara, managed things at the main ranch. These days away became precious to both of them, a chance to focus entirely on each other and Emma without the constant demands of ranch life. One warm afternoon in late July, as they sat on the cabin's small porch watching Emma chase butterflies in the meadow, Lillian felt the baby kick particularly hard. "I think this one's going to be as strong as his father," she said, placing Fletcher's hand where he could feel the movement. "Or as stubborn as his mother," Fletcher teased, his face alight with wonder at the life growing within her. "Do you think it's a boy, then?" Lillian asked, curious about his instincts. Fletcher considered for a moment. "I don't rightly know, boy or girl, it doesn't matter to me. Another daughter would be a blessing, a son would be too." "What shall we name this blessing, then?" Lillian asked, leaning comfortably against his shoulder. "If it's a girl, what about Catherine?" Fletcher suggested, surprising her. Lillian looked at him questioningly. "After your former sweetheart," Fletcher shook his head, smiling. "No, after your mother. You mentioned once that was her name. I thought it would be nice to honor her." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Lillian squeezed his hand. "And if it's a boy, Thomas," Fletcher said without hesitation. "After his mother's first love." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes. "You wouldn't mind?" "Mind, Lillian, I would be honored to have a son named after a man brave enough to follow his dreams and wise enough to love you," Fletcher assured her. "Besides, Emma should have that connection to her father's memory." In that moment, Lillian felt the final pieces of her heart that had been holding back fully open to this remarkable man. "I love you more than I ever thought possible," she whispered, leaning in to kiss him softly. "And I you," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. "More each day." August brought intense heat and the final weeks of Lillian's pregnancy. Fletcher insisted she remain at the main ranch house close to town in case the doctor was needed. He hovered anxiously, checking on her throughout the day and sleeping lightly at night, alert to any sign that the baby might be coming. On the last day of August, as a thunderstorm rolled across the valley reminiscent of the one that had first brought them together, Lillian's labor began. Martha sent one of the ranch hands racing for the doctor, while she and Clara prepared the bedroom with clean linens and hot water. Fletcher paced the hallway, wincing at each of Lillian's cries, praying fervently for her safety and that of their child. Emma was kept occupied in the kitchen, too young to understand the significance of the day, but aware that something important was happening. After 6 hours of labor, as the storm cleared and a rainbow arched across the eastern sky, Thomas Fletcher O'Malley entered the world with a lusty cry that immediately set his father's fears to rest. "A son," the doctor announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant in Fletcher's arms after examining and cleaning him. "A strong, healthy boy." Fletcher, overcome with emotion, carried his son to Lillian's bedside. "He's perfect," he whispered, carefully transferring the baby to her waiting arms, "just like his mother." Lillian gazed down at their child, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Hello, Thomas," she murmured, tracing a finger along his tiny cheek. "We've been waiting for you." Later, when Martha brought Emma in to meet her brother, the little girl approached the bed cautiously, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Baby?" she asked, pointing at the bundle in her mother's arms. "Yes, sweetheart," Lillian confirmed. "This is your baby brother, Thomas." Fletcher lifted Emma onto the bed where she could see better. "You're a big sister now, Emma. That's a very important job." Emma studied the baby solemnly before declaring, "My baby," with such conviction that both adults laughed. "Yes," Fletcher agreed, his heart full as he looked at his family gathered on the bed. "Our baby, our family." The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the O'Malleys. Silver Star Ranch prospered under Fletcher's careful management, expanding to include additional pastureland and more cattle. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's steady nature and his mother's compassionate heart. Emma blossomed into a confident, spirited child who adored her brother and shadowed Fletcher whenever possible, eager to learn everything about ranching. 2 years after Thomas's birth, Lillian gave birth to twin girls Sarah and Catherine, doubling the joy and chaos in the O'Malley household. Martha, though slowing with age, declared the twins her special charges, and spent many contented hours rocking them and telling stories of her own childhood in Pennsylvania. The small cabin by the creek became a special place for the family, a retreat where they would spend summer evenings and special occasions, a tangible reminder of how their story began. Fletcher added onto it as the children grew, but always maintained its simple, rustic character that Lillian loved. On the 5th anniversary of the flood that had brought them together, Fletcher and Lillian took their children to the cabin for a picnic. While the twins napped and Thomas and Emma played by the creek, now safely dammed and diverted by Fletcher to prevent future flooding, the couple sat on the porch, hands intertwined. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't ridden by that night?" Lillian asked, watching their children play in the dappled sunlight. Fletcher considered the question seriously. "I believe some things are meant to be one way or another. If not that night, then perhaps another time, another place, but I'm grateful it happened when it did." "As am I," Lillian agreed, leaning against his solid shoulder. "Though I do miss one thing about my old cabin." "What's that?" Fletcher asked curiously. "The view of the stars through that crack in the roof," she teased, making him laugh. "Well, Mrs. O'Malley, I can't offer you a leaky roof, but I could take you up to the meadow tonight after the children are asleep. The stars up there are something to behold." "It's a date, Mr. O'Malley," she replied with a smile that still made his heart race after all these years. That evening, true to his word, Fletcher spread a blanket on the grass of the high meadow, and they lay side by side, gazing up at the vast expanse of stars above Nevada territory. The Silver Star Ranch spread below them, lanterns glowing warmly in the windows of the main house where their children slept peacefully under Martha's watchful eye. "I never properly thanked you," Lillian said suddenly, turning to face her husband in the starlight. "For what?" Fletcher asked, puzzled. "For telling me not to look back that night. It wasn't just about the cabin falling apart. It was about everything: grief, fear, uncertainty. You taught me to look forward, and it saved me in more ways than you know." Fletcher gathered her in his arms, his voice thick with emotion when he replied, "And you taught me that looking forward is worthwhile only when you have someone to share the view. Before you, I had land and cattle and a big, empty house. Now I have everything that matters." They sealed this truth with a kiss beneath the stars. Two people who had found each other against all odds in the vast wilderness of the American West, building a love as enduring as the mountains that surrounded them and as life-giving as the unpredictable waters that had first brought them together. The legacy of that fateful night when a flood tore apart a cabin, and a cowboy extended his hand, would continue through their children and their children's children, a testament to the power of looking forward, of taking someone's hand in the midst of chaos, and of building something beautiful from the wreckage of what came before. For Fletcher and Lillian O'Malley, the story that began with loss and rescue had become one of enduring love, family, and the resilient spirit that defined the American frontier, a love born when floodwaters raged and saved by a cowboy's simple command. "Grab the baby in my hand, don't look back."